Ladies and gentlemen, now it's Too Late with Alan Mosley.
Woo!
Hey,
Yeah,
again.
that's pretty good. All right. Guys, welcome back for another episode of It's Too Late. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined as always by the number one producer in late night. It's Dave Wilimowski. Dave! Dave, how are you doing?
Good.
I've got him trained. It's like, excuse me, everyone. Dave's speaking. All right, Dave.
Yeah, keep it piped down. Yeah, doing good. How you doing, Alan? You still in hell?
Oh yeah, it hurts really bad. Well, it was my abdomen. Now it's also my neck. And so I learned something. Apparently this is a thing. I didn't know this. I actually talked to a physical therapist, and they said that when you have like an injury, particularly like a chronic injury, then you will just sometimes without even thinking about it, you'll start to adjust the way you move because you're trying to lessen the burden. And then when you do that unnatural movement, you then cause other injuries.
Neat.
Yeah. So since I'm like tilted over, right, because like I have a stab wound over here, now my neck is cranked.
Oh.
Yeah. And so basically what it is that your life is like dominoes. As soon as one goes bloop, it's just and
it's all over.
Yeah, and then you just call up the Guinness Book. He's like, "Hey, check this out," you know. Speaking of check this out, guys, we're almost down to 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the 6th annual It's Too Late live show. Coming to you Saturday, May 18th here in beautiful Columbia, Tennessee. There's going to be, oh my God, there's going to be kangaroos and a sloth and lemurs and nachos. Those are unrelated, I should probably emphasize.
Yeah, this list is getting weirder.
Yeah, well, one does not beget the other. I just want to clarify that. I think the nachos are chicken. I don't think they have chickens at the zoo. That's the one thing they don't have is chickens. Yeah, it's because we're eating all the chickens. That's why they don't have them. But anyway, you got to get your tickets. The link is over there in the chat. It's also down in the show notes. And because if you don't, then, you know, for the show, not for you, but also, I mean, I'll have a lot of free time on my hands if we can't fund the show. Is all I'm saying. All right. Anyway,
hobby.
Starting off tonight's news, on April 1st, California Assembly Bill 257 went into effect, raising the minimum wage in the Golden State to $20 per hour.
Wow.
After a years-long battle to bring equality to entry-level and fast food workers. In totally unrelated news, at Los Angeles area Chipotle locations, the double steak bowl is now $39.
Dear gosh.
Yeah, that's not even a joke, by the way. That's just a statement of truth. You worked at a food place, right? You worked at a restaurant before. Yeah. How much did you make per hour when you were there starting out?
Oh, geez. Starting out, it was under 8. It was 7.25 or something like that.
Yeah, I think I made
less.
I made $6 an hour. That's what I made. I didn't. Could you imagine making $20 an hour when you had started out? But see, that's the thing, though, is that you're sitting here thinking to yourself, "Oh, think how great my young life would have been." But in reality, all that means is that a movie ticket for you and your girl would have been $226.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. Also, earlier this week, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled that a wealthy white enclave that is currently part of Baton Rouge can split off to form their own city, form the new town of St. George. Check this out right here. Critics of the plan say that the move to separate the affluent community is rooted in racism and will economically devastate their city. However, proponents of the move argued successfully that access to white people is not a human right. It's not.
No.
Like unicorns. Look at those people. In election news, the Libertarian Party of America announced today that former President Donald Trump has been confirmed as a speaker at the LP National Convention in Washington, D.C. the last weekend in May. Trump's appearance marks the first time a major party candidate for president has appeared on stage at the LP convention. You know, it also marks the first time that the LP has had a speaker with such a distorted view of politics since, last year, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, come on, you know. And finally this evening, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem stirred up controversy this week. In an attempt to market her new memoir, Governor Noem shared the story of when she threw her own dog into a gravel pit and shot it to death after deciding that the pup was too stubborn to train. Now, many believe that being a self-professed puppy killer may derail her chances at getting the vice presidential selection. But you know what? Let's see what President Trump has to say about it himself.
He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
Wow. It's really, you know, I appreciate that. Really direct. Guys, let me tell you about tonight's sponsor, which is Fox & Sons Coffee, which you can find at foxandsons.com. If you use promo code ITL. You get 18% off orders for $25 or more. Shipping's always free on orders of $37.99 or more at foxnsons.com. I actually have a bag right here. Oh, this is the Den Blend Light. If you're into the light coffee, you into the light coffee, Dave?
I heard it's stronger.
Really?
Caffeine wise, yeah.
Well, I just eat the beans. I've been known to eat.
I've seen it.
Oh, you've watched, have you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's Fox. That's got really weird all of a sudden. It's, no. It's promo code ITL, 18% off. Cheers. Fox
Great deal. Great deal.
.com. What do you think? Commercial break?
Yeah, we could do that.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Hey, Dave.
Yes, Alan.
What time is it?
It's time for meme of the week.
I hate you so much. You know that, right? I hate you.
Who cooks in a lesbian relationship?
Oh, God, this shit again. Who?
No one.
Oh.
They both eat out.
I regret asking. 2 men broke into a pharmacy and stole all the Viagra. The police said to be on the lookout for hardened criminals.
They must have had a hard time escaping.
Bet.
Why did the Mexican throw his wife off the bridge?
Why?
Tequila!
That's racist, but kind of funny, so I'll let it pass.
Gracias.
Why does Batman only cover half of his face?
Oh, God, not the Batman jokes again.
It's for the police, so they'll know he's white.
Okay, calm down, Joker.
Wouldn't that be way better than a debate? That right there, to do like a
I'd
dad
actually
joke.
watch that.
Yeah, exactly. But we do have a bonus meme. Check out the bonus meme.
There we go. Okay.
You used to do that when you worked there, right? That was what you did?
They said extra sauce, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about the presentation. Oh, did you do that for real? If somebody said something like, "Oh, I want extra sauce,"
No.
you just. Oh, come on! I bet you did.
No, I've always take a lot of pride in my work. You know that.
All right, yeah, a lot of pride at the start of this segment. Let's go ahead and answer some viewer mail. You guys still doing that show?
Yeah.
All right. Andrew Avery writes, "Dear Alan and Dave, how do non-binary people kill someone?
Oh,
How do
I don't know.
non-binary
I didn't
people kill someone?
it's not a pun.
They/them.
Oh.
Yeah. That's a little bit surprising coming from Andrew, to be honest with you.
Yeah, a little edgy.
Matt Lacey writes, "Dear Alan and Dave, should you shower after taking a bath?" Dave, do you shower after taking a bath?
I mean, like, I rinse off, after I'm stewing in Dave's soup for a couple hours. I usually
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
rid of
I had to ask you because I don't take a bath because men take showers and women take baths. So
Yeah, I've heard that before.
yes, I wouldn't know. Celeste Annis writes, "Dear Alan and Dave, have you ever planted a garden? You guys do any gardening, Dave?"
I remember when we first moved in, I remember rototilling for some reason, but I don't really remember what we planted. We had strawberries. I remember having some lettuce, but it was too much work. We ended up not doing
Yeah.
it.
That is so typical of a lot of people that you tilled the garden, but nothing went in. It's just, there's just a patch of dirt.
Yeah. Freshly turned dirt.
We had one of those at my house growing up. Lyle Durio writes, "Dear Alan and Dave, should I grow a crop of corn to make ethanol and convert my truck to run on ethanol?" No.
That
No.
sounds dangerous, but Yeah, I think it's fun.
Well, the only way that the whole ethanol industry works as it is because the government subsidizes it. So if the question had read, Dear Alan and Dave, the government is going to subsidize my crops, should I grow corn? The answer is yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But in your case, no. Absolutely not. Aaron Kittner writes, Dear Alan and Dave, if you could merge two different animals to create the ultimate animal, what two animals would it be, and what would be the product? All right, Dave, you get to be God, and you can create a new animal out of two animals. What are you doing?
That's a lot of potential. I don't.
Yeah.
Like I just think like if you're downtown, like say like a squirrel and a pigeon. Could you imagine just squirrels flying around, just terrorizing people? That'd be horrible.
To Dave, the ultimate animal is a squirrel pigeon. Just Aaron, just FYI. I would probably pick. I would combine Sydney Sweeney and someone who would talk to me.
Oh,
yeah,
the ultimate. Yeah,
the ultimate. Yeah, and is also comfortable living in my closet.
Yeah,
yeah. Justin Campbell writes, Dear Alan and Dave, on a scale of 1 to 10, how similar to a slave auction would you say the NFL draft is? 1 being free market capitalists just getting the most for their job, and 10 being 1800s at the South Carolina port. Actually, Justin, I'm going to say it's a 2. And the only reason it's not a 1 is because a 1 would be there is no NFL draft, and you could just be like, good day. I would like 17 times the NFL salary cap. But if you were the best player in the world, then they'd be like, because then you'd have the people saying, oh, well, then like the Dallas Cowboys and New York Yankees, and like they would win every, but that turns out to not be true, right? Because in baseball, they pay tons of money and the Yankees kind of suck. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that should be, both the 1 and the 10 should be allowed. Mary Lynn Wilimowski writes, Dear Alan, Dave, when you drive, do you pay attention to the speed limit signs posted or just drive at the speed you feel like? Dave, got a lead foot?
No, I don't think so. No, we haven't had a problem with this. She might just be asking, but I don't know. I kind of just drive comfortably until I actually notice a speed limit sign, and then I try to be like maybe 5 miles above that. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I speed up, sometimes I slow down. I don't know.
Okay. Do you pay attention to speed limit signs? Yes. Do you drive at the speed you feel like? Also, yes.
No.
But knowing is half the battle. Brian Johnson writes, Dear Alan and Dave, are you an aggressive board game player? Oh, yes. Absolutely. So, yeah, when you run out of money in Monopoly and you land on my boardwalk, I'll let you pay however you can. Keep the game going. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Nice.
Sydney will love that.
The Sydney hybrid.
Keith McQuarrie writes, Dear Alan and Dave, have you ever gone boating? Keith, I have gone boating, and me and everyone I've ever known who's been on a boat doesn't call it that. No one says, the only people who say go boating are the people who live at like Martha's Vineyard, and they have their like cardigan and their sweater tied around their neck and whatever. Those are the only people who say gone boating.
Got their boat shoes on.
Yeah, boat shoes. My God. Ryan Seifert writes, Dear Alan and Dave, do you know of any cool events going on in Tennessee this month? In fact, there's the 6th annual It's Too Late live show coming to you Saturday, May 18th. Beautiful Columbia City. Get your tickets. And finally, Gary Dexter writes, Dear Alan and Dave, if you were able to wave a magic wand and bring a specific food or drink that is not available in your area to your local grocery, what would it be? Well, Gary, it just so happens that I actually emailed Cheerios and said, and I quote, bring back Banana Nut Cheerios, you cowards. And they actually wrote back and said, they actually wrote back and said that if it was popular enough, it would come back in the fall. And you know what? That was 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah. So they're liars.
Yeah, I think it's time for more than just words.
Oh, better believe it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't see Congress pass no law that said I couldn't talk shit about Cheerios. the big Cheerio lobby hadn't got them yet, All right, guys, we're going to be back with Connor Freeman of the Libertarian Institute right after this commercial break. Enjoy. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. Email us at info@alanmosley.tv. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our guest this evening is an assistant editor and writer at the Libertarian Institute, as well as a co-host of the foreign policy podcast Conflicts of Interest. You can find him on Twitter at Freeman'sMind96. Connor Freeman, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Alan. Glad to be back.
Well, we're glad to have you back, and now that you and I have solved all the world's problems in the green room before starting the show, I have to tell the audience we had an article pulled up. We were going to kind of kick things off with a little foreign policy news. We've decided to throw that away because there's just so much important stuff going on in the world. So obviously, how did your team do in the NFL draft?
You know what? I don't pay close enough attention to the NFL.
I'm just kidding. I'm not going to put you on the spot like that. So something that Connor and I were talking about just now, and we decided, well, let's just make this the whole show, is everyone is talking about the protests going on around the world, but particularly the U.S. and particularly at colleges and universities over Israel's war in Gaza. Now, it's funny, right? Because even how you frame it is going to make some people upset and other people upset for different reasons. Because some people would say, well, it's Israel's war with Hamas, and other people would say, well, it's Israel's genocide of the Palestinians. It's, so you're already going to lose some of the audience just even trying to explain what it is that's going on. So if you want to kind of give people a little bit of a brief rundown, what is kind of your overview take of the protests going on at some of the campuses around the country and kind of what the reaction has been to that?
Well, they seem to have concrete demands in the sense that what they're protesting against, or what they're demanding from the universities is divestment from corporations that are involved in the Israeli war machine. And that are involved in businesses that are operating in the illegal settlements. And that it seems part and parcel with the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Act, of which there's several dozen states in the U.S. that have laws against that. People protesting for boycott, divestment, or sanctions against Israel because it's deemed to be anti-Semitic, even though this has historically been what people do with apartheid states like South Africa. And it was encouraged back then. I mean, the U.S. government dragged its feet and was one of the last governments to rescind its support for South Africa and its relations with them. But nevertheless, that was, you had huge rock concerts with big celebrities promoting sanctions and boycotts of South Africa. And it is the consensus among human rights organizations and even Israeli human rights organizations that Israel is an apartheid state. And I'm not talking about within Israel proper. I'm talking about the millions of Palestinians who have no political rights, who are living under an occupation in the West Bank and in Gaza, which has existed for longer now than the Soviet Union ruled Eastern Europe. And the reality of people living in the West Bank, let alone Gaza, is intolerable. You can just read, for instance, since October 7th, we've seen a huge rise in home demolitions in East Jerusalem. You can imagine your home is demolished because you're the wrong religion, and then you're forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars, which you don't have, to the cops that came and demolished your home and left you homeless with your family. So this is what people mean when they talk about apartheid. That's one example. And so in the case of the protesters themselves, what we see is, in my lifetime since the Iraq War, the first significant anti-war movement. And I've been told by people who have been involved in this kind of work far longer than I have, that this is actually a bigger deal than the American protests against the war in Iraq. So that's very encouraging. In terms of, the politically where these people stand, I don't know. I don't know exactly, because it's a lot of people on the right and even some libertarians, as you and I were discussing in the green room, seem to paint with a broad brush and assume that these people are all communists who have nothing but the worst of intentions with regards to people on our side of the political spectrum.
Well, I want to get into that, because I want to kind of break this down a little bit. And it's like, so there's the obvious question, as Kanye gave us, who's they though? And so when you say the protesters, well, who are the protesters? And because again, I feel like one of the catch-22 of the era of social media that we live in is that on one hand, I can go on Twitter, or whatever, and in 5 seconds, I can see so much like live footage and pictures and information that just wouldn't have been available not all that long ago. And I would have had to trust Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather to be telling me what's really going on. And of course, hindsight being 2020, boy, look how the mainstream media has if not downright lied, at least shifted opinions. And so on the one hand, you have access to all this information, like right at your fingertips. But then on the other hand, it's that, well, but what is verifiable? I'm being just assaulted with images and with video, and people are always going to seek for their own, biases, right? Their confirmation bias. And so I'm seeing boomers over here that are saying, well, look, they're holding up this sign that says, kill all the Jews. Now, for all I know, they made that sign themselves and put it in the picture. I don't know. But that's the thing. But that's the thing about trying to disseminate your own information, right? Is that if you weren't there, you don't really know. And then on the other side, I've got people over here saying that, well, they're not even college students. They're just being bussed in. They're professional protesters. Man, you and I missed our calling. We could have been damn good professional protesters. But these aren't even kids that go to these schools. And then you have people on this side saying, well, actually, it's not like they're all a bunch of, Hamas supporting Muslim terrorists. Actually, there's a overrepresentation of Jews at the protesting what's going on in Gaza. So if you're going to talk about, well, we have to protect the Jewish communities at these colleges, well, maybe you don't crack the skulls of those particular Jews that just so happen to be down in the yard talking about what's going on. And so I don't even know if I really have so much a question or a setup for you here. It's just as to say is that there's so much to dig into. And I feel like when you and I are just conversing about what's going on, we're not talking to any of those groups. We're not talking really to the groups that they already knew everything there was to know about foreign policy in Israel and Gaza and Palestine and the whole world and the college students. They already knew everything there was to know about that before they even opened up the first article. So their minds can't be changed one way or the other. For good or ill, by the way, either one. That's not really what the conversation's for. It's for the people kind of on the outside looking in that are like, boy, what am I looking at right now?
Right. I would say the narrative that these are anti-Semitic protests is, by all appearances and everything I've read and witnessed so far, not the case. And to your point, I can't possibly know the details of every organization. For instance, I believe it was more than 100 different organizations that were involved in putting together the Gaza Solidarity Encampment at Columbia University alone. But one of the leading groups was Jewish Voice for Peace. One of the leading leftist anti-war activist groups is Code Pink, which is led by Medea Benjamin, who's also Jewish. And she's been very good on this issue from a libertarian perspective this entire time, talking about ending the occupation and U.S. aid to Israel and ending the war itself. She just got arrested, actually, for protesting Lloyd Austin at the Senate Armed Services Committee, or it was the House Armed Services Committee. But who could be against that? She denounced him for speaking of the indispensable role of U.S. leadership in the world in the midst of this war on Gaza. And we're talking, again, of some of the poorest, most defenseless people in the world who the American people should just, whatever your position is, we should not be at war with them. They did not attack us. And this is not we are absolutely involved in this war to the point where we're providing, unprecedented intelligence to the Israelis. We're shipping off more that we've Biden has greenlighted more than 100 arms sales, including for thousands of 2,000-pound bombs to be leveled in dropped in densely populated urban areas. And we don't know exactly, because of the destruction of the healthcare system in the Strip. We don't really know how many people have died, but it's definitely in the tens of thousands, and actually a majority of those have been women and children, and that's accepted even by our government. Like those numbers are accepted by the State Department and the UN and all the European Mediterranean Humanitarian Monitor, and a group large swaths of other humanitarian organizations. So just for the sake of argument, this is a cause that I think should be supported by libertarians for all kinds of reasons. We can get into, of course, talking about the results of the 20 plus years of the terror wars and what that's meant for our own the fiscal health of the United States, such as it is. We're more than $30 trillion in debt. We're far less free than we were when the war started. And we have the risk always with Israel involved of terrorist attacks on the United States, what the CIA calls blowback. Of course, Ron Paul educated such a, hopefully, it continues to. That Giuliani moment is etched in most libertarians' brains. But that a big part of that was U.S. support for Israel, which led to the attacks on 9/11. And not just that, we've already seen American service members killed in the midst of this war. And the troops illegally occupying Syria and who are still stationed in Iraq have come under rocket attacks from Shia militias that we support and also ones that we don't support, as a result of this policy, of this unconditional support for the Biden administration. So there's so many reasons for libertarians, I think, to not only to support the cause, either directly or just by not opposing them or just passively supporting them. I don't really understand the argument yet, and I have seen some rather ridiculous statements made by certain people on our side talking about, basically encouraging the idea that cops should start shooting these protesters. I haven't seen them do anything yet that would possibly warrant that. If I'm wrong, you please point out to me, Alan. But it seems to me that we have some significant common ground with these protesters. And as I said, again, as Peter Beinart has pointed out, there's a overrepresentation of Jews in these protests. So the mainstream narrative that they are anti-Semitic or that they're supporting Hamas or that they're, Benjamin Netanyahu said that these people are going to kill Jews anywhere they find them. I find that very dubious, to say the least, obviously, given that there are already, we're seeing counter protesters, pro-Israel people showing up who are getting violent with the pro-Palestinian side. And we have seen cops crushing these other activists who are protesting against the war, but we haven't seen any killings yet of Jews, and we haven't seen any significant violence or escalations on the part of the anti-war crowd. And so it just seems like basically we're being sold a completely false narrative, or largely false narrative, that there's anti-Semitism. That what you referenced earlier, the "kill the Jews" comment, that actually I just saw Greenwald earlier this week, Glenn Greenwald, share a report on Twitter about how that was actually a pro-Israel demonstrator. And they basically, what they were saying was, "Kill the Jews, kill the Jews. Is this what you support?" And then, of course, it got picked up in the media that we heard "kill the Jews" but it was a hoax. Yeah. And this has been going on since October 7th. There was earlier on a protest in the early weeks of the war in Australia where somebody said they heard somebody say "gas the Jews," and it got ran in Reuters, and the organizers of the group said, "We kicked that person out, and we don't tolerate that kind of anti-Semitism and hate. That has nothing to do with what we're doing here." And later on, it turned out that it didn't even happen in the first place. They were just on the defensive because who
Yeah.
wouldn't be in this climate?
Well, yeah, sure. And by the way, for the sake of the algorithms and monetization, thank you so much for saying "kill the Jews" 17 times. But I did want to kind of circle back to. So you had briefly mentioned, and this was the next thing I wanted to get into before we take our first break, is that obviously you have a lot of people on the right wing side. You know, by the way, these are the same people who used to scoff at the left when they would try to say, you know, words are violence, and they would say, well, words aren't violence, violence is violence. But now suddenly the words, you know, in any words that come out that are against the state of Israel, well, that must be met with force. Funny how that turned out. But even amongst people closer to home, and this isn't really a libertarian show, but it's no secret that I've been a libertarian and have a mostly libertarian audience. But we have people within our own camp that are echoing that same kind of sentiment, right? Of saying that, well, it's always the commie angle, isn't it? It's like, well, there's a lot of far left-wing communist type people at these protests. These supposed anti-war protests are full of Marxists, and those people hate us. Oh goodness, if those people had the levers of power, they would be putting us in the boxcars. And so, you know, I'll be damned if I'm going to support anything they're going to support. I support the, you know, what a Tom Cotton would say, which is, well, let's just march in the National Guard and break up all these protests. Which by the way, we know what that means, right? You know, Kent State's the first thing that pops into your head when you're thinking, let's bring in the National Guard because these 19 to 22-year-olds are just so gosh darn rebellious. But so even people in our own community are saying, well, I actually support breaking these things up because of the communist angle to it. You had mentioned the lady from Code Pink. There was also Jill Stein. Jill Stein
Yes.
was at one of the protests, and they had the video of the cops are using their bikes, you know, because, you know, the cops have their little trikeys. And so they're using the bike kind of as like a shield, and they're shoving and so they knock her, which Jill Stein's like 700 years old, right? So they shoved this old lady to the ground into the dirt, and they're arresting her. And so I
They've
wouldn't
been
be
brutalizing women the entire time. The police
imagine
response-
that cops are
Yeah.
brutalizing women. I can't believe it. And so the point being is that I guess I try really hard to look at things like this from a well, I'm going to hear it from both sides, and I'm going to be open. I'm going to open myself up to being convinced of one thing or another. I'm not going to be convinced that what Israel's doing is a good thing. I think it's a monstrous thing what's going on in Gaza right now. But I'm willing to accept arguments of, well, there's some bad actors, you know, in these protests, and so I want to disassociate from them. Or oh, well, if these people had their way, it wouldn't just simply be, you know, ending this war, it would be all of this other stuff. Or you know, or oh, well, you know, I'm usually against using physical violence and force, but somehow through the magic of Benjamin Netanyahu, we've determined that their protests are actually violent, and therefore they violated the NAP somehow, and therefore they deserve what they get. Which, by the way, is there any more dangerous concept than talking about what people deserve, right?
Yeah. No, and I will say this, I don't respect the position from some people where they say, hey, I don't support any foreign aid to Israel, but I want, you know, these protests to be crushed. I mean, I think from a libertarian and a conservative perspective, what people should be most angry about, even if they don't care about the Palestinians, they don't care about the Syrians, the Lebanese who are being bombed and murdered by the Israelis with full backing from the Joe Biden administration. Again, why are we supporting Joe Biden's wars and wanting to see a crackdown on leftists of all people on the ground in the tens of thousands, at least, protesting the Joe Biden administration from a actual anti-war position? I'm not sure why we would condemn that, but we just got robbed $20 billion this year in the span of only a couple of months to continue funding Israel's war. That's $20 billion stolen from the American middle class. And then we have Donald Trump green lighting that and facilitating it, backing Mike Johnson, who just stabbed the entire American conservative movement in the back. And he is calling for the protests to be crushed as well. So in other words, we're going to rob your family, and then we're going to, if your kids protest against this gargantuan theft, then we will have state troopers and police officers beat the living hell out of them. It's just completely backwards. The American right and our camp libertarians, I think, should never encourage state violence against anybody, because obviously it can always be used against us. And we should, if we're against foreign aid and we're against these endless wars, like we all talk a good game about that, then we should either be out there in the streets doing this ourselves. And if you don't want to have commies in your protest, you don't have to have commies in your protest. The protest that was organized in Washington, D.C. in February of last year with the Libertarian Party and the People's Party excluded conservatives from speaking at the rally. Now, that wasn't a wise decision on my part. I'd like to see as much as the least amount of sectarianism possible in matters like this. But I don't see why their views on other issues should have any sort of bearing on how we believe the state should get involved in these kinds of matters. If anything, the American right and libertarians who agreed that they're against this war and against American families who are already living paycheck to paycheck being robbed $20 billion to go to this apartheid state that's engaged in what has been deemed to be plausibly a genocide by the International Court of Justice. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. We have more than 1 million people facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity by design, because the Israelis they already had Gaza under a blockade for 17 years, but they have cut the level of aid shipments so significantly for so long and bombed the not just all the infrastructure you can think of, from hospitals to universities to homes, hundreds of thousands of buildings. So you've seen UN shelters blown up. Virtually every hospital has been destroyed. 400 health facilities, not just the hospitals, have been hit with Israeli bombs. We've seen aid workers massacred deliberately in front of the whole world, and the Joe Biden administration does nothing about it. And again, we're paying for all of this. So we should be ecstatic, quite frankly, that this woke mob communist loony bin, which is what essentially higher education in the United States has been turned into over the last generation, is now no longer advocating for men to be allowed to use women's bathrooms if they're properly, dressed in drag, and looking to get you to comply with their pronoun demands with all the different zers and z's and all these other things. They're actually out there doing what we always been saying. Where did the anti-war left go? This is what libertarians always say, and this is what when it comes to China, that's a completely different story, and unfortunately the same for Israel. But the American right that is against the war in Ukraine will pat themselves on the back and go, and where's the left? Where's the left? And we always hear that the American right is better on this than the Democrats and the leftists. Well, now the leftists are out there putting together the most significant anti-war movement we've seen since the Vietnam War, and I just don't see how that is not just drastically more preferable to what we've been dealing with the social justice warriors this entire time. It's also very important, I think, that the administrators and the leaders of the wokest institutions in the United States are completely unmasking themselves by sending out cops to brutalize what are effectively still very young people, with the full force of the law, including, as we said earlier, young girls and old women, because you have a lot of faculty coming out to support these people as well. And we've seen women in their 60s being just shoved to the ground by cops and kneed in the back, and we've seen people zip tied and tased when they can't possibly move or defend themselves. And this is being cheered on by media personalities across the right wing. You know, I mean, Megyn Kelly, Jack Posobiec, all these people are just cheering it all on. And then you have people like Dan Bongino, I just saw on Twitter today, saying Nazis are taking over the universities and all this.
Yeah.
And it's, you know.
Yeah, well, something I know that we've talked about on the show a number of times before is how Republicans just love to lose. And so leave it up to Republicans to see one side of the left wing genuinely having a schism with the other side of the left wing. And instead of cheering it on and saying, let them fight, what do the Republicans do? They try to run in to put a stop to it. That's how much
they're intervening on behalf of Biden is essentially what they're doing.
On that note, we're gonna be back to talk a little bit more about the protests and Conservative Inc. right after this commercial break. Don't go away. It's Too Late with Alan Mosley is proudly supported by Fox & Sons Coffee. Fans of It's Too Late use code ITL and receive 18% off orders of $25 or more. Shipping's always free on orders over $37.99, so get yours today at their website, which is www.foxinsons.com. It's www.foxinsons.com. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are joined once again with our friend Connor Freeman of the Libertarian Institute. So, Connor, we've talked a lot about how, you know, look, hey, I use these examples before we started today. It's like, you know, you think of like the protesters who show up. I don't know why it's always tomato juice. I don't know why, if there's something to do with the red, but they show up with cans of tomato juice or tomato soup and they throw it on the Mona Lisa to protest, I don't know, climate change or whatever, because that'll drop the temperature a degree. It's destroying priceless heirlooms. Another popular one is when they create the barriers on the freeway. And so now you see like 20 miles of deadlock because there's people who are against fossil fuels or whatever, and they're laying down in the interstate, which, by the way, I wouldn't recommend, just FYI. But the list goes on, right? Like there's lots of examples of times when people are protesting something and it's easy to mock and deride those people if you don't agree with what it is they're protesting. But frankly, they get a lot of negative press even from people on their own side of the ideological line, because it's like, well, that's not the right way. This is just upsetting people. So now you're conflating being an asshole with whatever your cause is. And so again, the people whose minds aren't made up, you're just alienating those people. And so I'm willing to accept that there are people who would say that, well, I don't like what I'm seeing. Like, look, I get that there's things going on in the world that I don't like too, and I wish we could do something about it, but this isn't the right way. So, which would then lead us to the question, Connor, what is the right way? What's the right way to protest?
Well, blocking public roads and, I haven't seen the pro-Palestinian protesters going to museums and attack, trying to destroy priceless art yet. But certainly blocking public roads and preventing people from getting to work is horrible, and it's so stupid that I wouldn't be surprised if there's provocateurs who are actively trying to undermine the cause that are involved in that. We've already seen various instances where it does appear to be that there are some infiltrators in the protests who are trying to get things, get sound bites that make them look horrible, like people out there saying, we want to see October 7th 10,000 more times and stuff like this. And they just so happen to work for the CIA. Imagine that. Yeah, exactly. And so, as far as what's the best way to do it, I really have never been involved in any sort of protest movement. As I said, I've been to one major anti-war protest in my life, and out here in Arizona, it wasn't all that big. It was about 100 people in a basically a public park, giving speeches and stuff. And I guess major like libertarian conventions don't really count. But
No, but that's good though. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because you say it almost embarrassed, like, well, we didn't, it's not like we had 1 million people marching on DC. But that's kind of the point though, right? Is that you have all these people that will say that, well, you got to protest the right way, and if you feel strongly about X, then you should get up off your ass and do Y and Z. It's like, well, yeah, we did. Where were you? I didn't. It's like I didn't see you at church on Sunday. It's that sort of thing. We had talked before. The same people, because you were talking about the right, and I would love for this to be a segue to talk a little bit about the whole conservative Inc. side of things too, because there's a schism there, just in the same way that there's a schism with the left on Israel and Gaza, in that you'll have all these people say that, well, we were against all this. They just passed these bills for funding. We're against more money for Ukraine. Where was the left? Where was the left on Ukraine? It's like, well, yeah, well, where were you? I was at the anti-war protest in Arizona, and there was only 100 people there. Where were you?
Yeah, exactly. And just because they weren't there before, but they're here now, is not a reason to, I don't know what, discourage them or just absolutely resolutely say you'll never work with them. That doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, if we can see a fight, as you said, between the left half of the left versus the Democrats that are blue no matter who, regardless of all the atrocities being committed in their name in Ukraine, in the buildup for war with China, in the sanctions on Syria and Venezuela and North Korea, and the buildup, and we are still tempting war with North Korea under Biden, with his constant deployment of forces for major military exercises that are just rehearsals for regime change, and sending over nuclear armed submarines and other strategic assets, just menacing them. A country that's been under devastating sanctions for generations, which we have no reason to be at odds with, and we could just as easily do business with them and have some diplomacy and engagement. But this administration is completely allergic to that. And so there's a myriad of things, as far even just on foreign policy, that I would love to see people out in the streets, demanding an end to. The one that's going to be the toughest nut to crack, if not Israel, is this buildup for war with China. The good news is there does seem to be a great deal of alarm on the part of a broad majority of the public about not only the conduct of the war in Gaza, because, well, at least according to various polling that's been done, roughly 2/3 of the American people would like to see a ceasefire. They'd like to see the United States call for a ceasefire. In the case of Ukraine, we have about 55%, according to a CNN poll from last year, who are against any further military aid being sent to Ukraine. And we have, I believe it's just over a majority of Americans who disapprove of the Israeli actions in Gaza. So that is obviously not being responded to on the part of our ruling class. They just defy the American people, and we saw that in a very brazen fashion earlier this month, when the $95 billion foreign military aid bill was passed. What the good news is I think that Americans can see there is a crack up on the right over this Israel issue, and I think that can't come soon enough, because given Netanyahu's precarious, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel's very precarious political situation he's in right now, because before the war started, first of all, he was killing Palestinians at a higher rate than we've seen in many, many years. Before October 7th, well over 200 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces and Israeli settlers, including a 2-year-old boy who was shot in the head at point-blank range in the West Bank, only a couple of months before the October 7th attack. We had seen bombings just last year of Gaza. Back in May, there was a smaller bombing campaign against the Gaza open-air prison, and also at the same time, Netanyahu was bombing Lebanon. He came into office and immediately launched drone strikes against Iran. We saw, raids and airstrikes in the airstrikes during raids in the West Bank against refugee camps, which is something we haven't seen in about 15 or 16 years in the occupied territories. And of course, they were also bragging. His defense minister was bragging about how they had doubled the airstrikes in Syria, which were already taking place at roughly once every week. So, there was obviously, this was a huge powder keg waiting to blow. And the American right and a large part of the American public, I think, has since October 7th, because of just the plethora of videos and images that have been coming across social media, and basically anybody with access to the internet has been able to witness massacre after massacre. And we just see so many photos and images, images and videos of dead children and old women and pregnant girls who are having their limbs blown off, and young men and young boys being killed. All this wanton destruction. About 60 to 70% of the people who have been killed by the Israelis so far in their relentless, indiscriminate airstrikes have been women and children. This has caused even conservative media personalities like Candace Owens to say, I was wrong about Israel. And and basically her position is that she doesn't want to see women and children killed with her tax dollars, and she doesn't want to support this government if it's going to be dragging the U.S. into another protracted war in the Middle East. And that is a huge risk because, as I said, with Netanyahu facing his corruption trials, I always thought he was going to try and start a war once he came back to power in December of 2022. And I assumed it would be with Iran. But instead, he took the opportunity after the October 7th attack to just go forward with an ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. And politically, if he can take Gaza back, it was always under occupation, but in 2005, the settlers and the Israeli forces were pulled out shortly before the blockade was imposed. And that's a gaping wound in the Israeli public's mind, and they're very happy to see what's going on in Gaza, and they look forward to resettling it, as do many of the most extreme members of Netanyahu's very far-right coalition in Israel right now. And so he does have a lot of incentives and has already attempted to drag the U.S. into direct involvement in this war against Iran. I mean, when they bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus, that was under international law. There's no difference between that and bombing Iranian soil. And what they actually did was they killed the top Quds Force commander, which is sort of the foreign the branch of they're the top tier of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They're involved in operations in neighboring countries, especially Syria, since the U.S. was backing al-Qaeda proxies there in an attempt to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad back during the Obama years. And so they killed one of the top commanders in the Iranian military, along with his deputy, another top general, and several others. And so the Iranians responded, and in a restrained fashion. They attacked only military sites. They didn't kill anybody. And they also gave ample notice to neighboring countries and by extension, the U.S. And they sent in mostly very slow-moving drones and announced them as soon as they got launched, hours before they even got to Israeli airspace. And so most of these were shot down, but they did hit some key military sites that they say were involved in these attacks on their people in Syria. Now, if we get into a war with Iran, there's a very good chance that we will see enormous casualties. Certainly on the Iranian side, we'll see the U.S. involved in a war with the entire axis of resistance, which would include the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Obviously we would see possibly U.S. intervention directly in Palestine. They would be at war with the Shia militias in Iraq, as well as Syria and the Syrian government, its forces, and of course the Iran, which is a country of 80 million people, and they've been preparing for this war for a very long time. The last thing they want is to fight a war with the United States, but if it comes to that, this war which would involve so many countries in the Middle East could dwarf the consequences of the last 20 plus years of the terror wars, which we've already seen has cost the American people $8 or $9 trillion plus trillions more just in interest payments. Sure. And 4.5 million people killed directly and indirectly by our interventions. And if we do get into a situation like this, I don't think it's inconceivable at all that we could see a reinstatement of the draft. So it's very important that the American right get out ahead of this. And thankfully, we are seeing a crack up where people are just fed up, at least it seems like, like it to me. I'm not on the right, so I can't tell. And I do have to caution myself because even with, particularly with respect to social media, I do live in somewhat of an echo chamber, given that I follow basically anti-war people from all these different sides, but I'm, again, mostly following the anti-war people. Sometimes
Sure.
if there's people are too hawkish or too, whatever, they're too much sounding like boomers that I grew up, suffocated with this kind of Fox News reactionary politics, I kind of just tune them out or unfollow them. But Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson have really made some significant changes on the American right, where they are seriously questioning this great power competition with Russia, not so much with China, but particularly with Russia, and the fact that they see just the corruption of the Ukraine war, the fact that it's costing us nearly $200 billion already. We're up to about $185 billion that have been spent on the war. And we've seen all we've seen is escalation to the brink of nuclear war with Russia. And yet the Ukrainians haven't won anything. It's clear that Putin is not attempting to invade the rest of Europe. He's made very clear what his reasons for intervening in Ukraine were. It came on the heels of more than 8 years of civil war backed by the U.S. against ethnic Russians on the border with Russia in the Donbass region, where more than probably about 10 or 14,000 people have been killed. And this was a result of the U.S. basically turning Ukraine into a NATO proxy, which, if the shoe were on the other foot, the Americans would have launched nukes and burned down the whole world.
Sure.
And the American right can totally understand that. And it's a case that Tucker Carlson has essentially made many times. And
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but you're doing your best Scott Horton impression, so I'm going to cut you off right now. We don't have anywhere near enough time to get into Ukraine and all that other stuff tonight. But I did want to end on a positive note, and it is that in the same way that we're kind of seeing this schism on the left, between the more progressive types that are saying, well, why are we beholden to Israel? And then of course there's the regime Democrats who are saying, no conditions, right? No strings attached. Which by the way, those are my favorite people, because I'm like, well, if they launched a nuke at New York City, does that mean you still support Israel? Like, because I just hate hyperbole, right? So when they say no conditions, I'm like, really? No conditions? Yeah. And of course and then on the right side, you have this schism brewing where same thing, you have the regime right who are just, they're going to be all in on every war. They're going to be all in on Israel. But particularly with conservatives in Israel is that, 10, 20 years ago, not even, 5 years ago, if you were a self-described conservative and you on a public forum, in your community, at your workplace, on social media, if you said something that was critical of Israel, I mean, you would be professionally crucified, right? And perhaps literally if you're go the wrong way with those Israelites. But now, all of a sudden, even if it's only 5 or 10%, even if it's a relatively small number of conservatives that are like, you know what, I've listened to what Candace said or what Tucker said, and I'm willing to question what's going on, and at a bare minimum, I don't believe that our support of anyone can be with no strings attached. That's something. It maybe it's not a lot today, but it's definitely a move in the right direction, no pun intended. And it's more than it could have been said certainly a generation ago. And so anyway, on that note, because we're way over time, and I've still got one question for you, because you're not going to get out of here without it. So first, Connor, where can people go to support you and get more of your stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at the Libertarian Institute. I'm the assistant editor there. So my articles you can find in the featured articles or latest articles section. Also write news articles there as well with Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter. We also do conflicts of interest. Kyle puts out about 4 episodes a week on that show, and I co-host once a week. And I'm also on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96, and you can find all of our stuff at antiwar.com as well in the news section and the viewpoints section.
All right, Connor, we're going to get you out of here on this one. Are you a big coffee drinker?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, this is right up your alley then. Is a vanilla soy latte a 3-bean soup?
I'm going to have to say I think you could. I think it qualifies.
That is correct. A vanilla soy latte is, in fact, just simply a 3-bean soup. I knew I liked you.
Beans, soybeans.
Yeah, exactly. You've got it. I knew that you were one of the smart ones over there, Connor. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Guys, we're going to be back to wrap up the show right after this commercial break. Don't go away. If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley. Like our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Alan Mosley TV. You can follow me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Alan Mosley TV. Subscribe to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/Alan Mosley TV. But if you're more of a listener than a watcher, you get us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice thanks to Spotify. It's Too Late with Alan Mosley or Alan Mosley TV. Also, don't forget to get your tickets to the 6th annual It's Too Late live show, coming to you Saturday, May 18th in beautiful Columbia, Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
Dave, do you have a final thought?
Man, what a show we put on. That was amazing.
This is a great show.
Twitter's red hot. I know they came in to see the monologue and the viewer mail. I'm glad they stuck around for the interview. That was great.
428 people.
X. Yeah.
That's weird. Y'all got to stop that shit. After party?
Yeah, real quick.
All right, real quick. Guys, thank you so much for watching another episode of It's Too Late, and we will see you next week. We can't be having episodes with 428 people watching.
No. I don't know if we delete the channel or just do something super problematic.
Probably just say the N-word.
I don't know.
Again.
From what I hear on X, that's acceptable now, right?
Well, I know you can call people retards, but here's my secret. I never stopped.
Oh, yeah.
I was calling people retards the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, you always could.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. We got to cap the viewership at 420.
Nice.
Yeah.